Hey everybody, I'm JC from One Shot Adventures, and today we're going to run through another one of my crazy game design experiments. As many of you know, I have a website where I release free adventures for RPG fans. Many times I convert these adventures to different systems because, one, I know not everybody plays the same game systems I play, and two, I find it a really fun game design exercise to see how a different system might completely change out how an encounter in one of my adventures will play. Many times, the system doesn't make much of a difference at all. Negotiating with Jabba the Hutt is going to generally play out the same in D6 Star Wars as it is in D20 Star Wars as it is in Gurps. But other times, encounters can swing wildly. For example, a few months ago, I simulated a gangster taking on an attack from a deep one, and wow, the game system just made a huge difference to the deadliness of that one encounter. Today, I'm going to talk about Tucker's Kobolds, a legendary RPG encounter. For those of you not familiar, Tucker's Kobolds was an article written way back when in Dragon magazine in 1987. There, editor Roger E. Moore told a story from the earliest days of Dungeons & Dragons, where a game master named Tucker had crafted this incredibly dangerous dungeon for his players. Now, Moore described how the dungeon had acid baths everywhere.
This dungeon don't look too hard, boys. Just some green water right ahead.
And there was even a time where the party's donkeys got transformed into fire demons, and I think that killed everybody.
Hey Jenny, you look a little funny. You okay, girl?
But the most dangerous part of this whole dungeon were the kobolds who lived on level 1. These were just regular, ordinary kobolds. They had a few hit points, some crappy weapons, but Game Master Tucker ran them like an elite force of Viet Cong. Like, no matter how high level the party was, those kobolds were terrifying. They would tear into the PCs with arrow attacks from murder holes. They would put blockades of flaming debris everywhere, lock the doors, and make ambush attacks from the ceiling. The party was shredded time and time again by the kobolds, and every time the players thought about that dungeon, they would try to figure out how to avoid level 1 because it was so deadly. It was, and still is, a fantastic lesson in game mastering. How you run your monsters is more important than the monsters themselves. As a game master, I've often wondered, how deadly were Tucker's Kobolds really? Or was this just a fun story that got exaggerated over time, maybe after like 1 or 2 PCs died in this dungeon in an unlucky way? Well, today we're going to find out. I'm going to simulate an initial encounter with Tucker's Kobolds, and we'll see what your chances really are. And I'm going to simulate it using 3 different game systems: original old school Dungeons & Dragons, or old school Essentials in this case, 5th edition, and a completely different game system, Gurps. And we're going to see how the system affects this encounter and see which system makes Tucker's Kobolds really the horrifying ambushers they were said to be. A couple of disclaimers. First of all, this is all for fun, and I wrote some simple scripts that are brute force interpretations of a possible combat encounter in each system. In a real game, your players would handle Tucker's Kobolds like completely differently than I do here. Tactics are always going to win over dice rolls in a situation like this. Second, there's no way I have the time or technical capacity to write a script that simulates an entire run through a dungeon level filled with all these kobolds. So I'm going to narrow this down to just the first few moments of an encounter with these ambushers. Like, here's how I imagine it. The PCs are creeping through Tucker's dungeon with only a shuttered lantern lighting their way. Suddenly they hear kobolds in the distance, getting closer, taunting them. The PCs realize that they've alerted Tucker's Kobolds, and as they look for an escape, suddenly the corridor fills with fire as a Molotov cocktail explodes around them. 3 kobolds fire crossbow bolts from hidden murder holes in the walls, and 3 more kobolds leap out from a hidden door to pile onto Sir Roger, the brave fighter, leading the way for his party. Other kobolds come up from behind, to hit the rest of the party, distracting everybody. If Sir Roger can fend off these initial kobolds and survive this fight, then the rest of the kobolds will withdraw into the darkness and prepare to hit again later, but give the party enough time to escape to the elevator and get on to the next level. So I'm going to focus on that initial encounter with Sir Roger and those 6 kobolds. Can he cut down those kobolds and escape, or will he fall and leave the rest of his friends vulnerable to the murderous Tucker's kobolds? Sir Roger is a skilled fighter. While the Tucker's Kobolds article talked about 12th level characters, I said Sir Roger is actually level 5. This is one of the party's earliest encounters with Tucker's Kobolds. He's wielding a +1 longsword and he's armed with chainmail and a shield. The kobolds are very typical kobolds. There are 3 of them firing from murder holes with light crossbows, and the others are using spears or staffs like described in the article. They're trying to push the party into one of those acid pools in the dungeon. Once the 3 attacking kobolds are dead, the ones in the murder holes will withdraw. I'll make some slight adjustments based on each game system, but here we go. Let's see how this plays out. We're going to begin with Old School Essentials, one of the oldest versions of D&D. This is basically a very precise port of like BX Dungeons and Dragons. Here, Sir Roger has Strength 15 as a fighter, he's got Constitution 13 and 26 hit points at level 5. He's wielding a +1 longsword. His kobold opponents are pretty pathetic in this edition. They have 2 hit points each, except for the lead kobold, who I said was a chieftain, and he has a whopping 4 hit points. They have armor class 7. In old school D&D, this is going to be a very straightforward brute force battle, with Sir Roger really having nothing else to do but slash the kobolds frantically as he takes fire from the kobolds in the murder holes. In classic D&D, those crossbows will fire every other round. When I ran a simulation of this battle 100,000 times, our brave Sir Roger was cut down 54% of the time. Now, from a storytelling perspective, it's the murder holes that really give the kobolds a huge advantage here. When Sir Roger dies, it's almost always from the crossbows. And of all the times he died, those arrows were responsible for 74% of his deaths. This feels exactly like Tucker's Kobolds was described in the article. Like, any encounter with these guys means you should really just like run for your life and just get out of there and not stand and fight. So based on this, Tucker's Kobolds is absolutely a real story. Is that good or bad? Well, we'll talk about that later. But so far, this totally verifies that Tucker's Kobolds was a real thing in my book. Let's advance 30 years to 5th edition. How does this fight work out? Well, as you can imagine, things are going to even out a lot for Sir Roger in this edition. He gains abilities that he never had in old school Dungeons & Dragons. As a 5th level fighter, he has 42 hit points, way more than his old school counterpart. And he can attack twice per turn, and he gets a bevy of special combat maneuvers now. He has a bonus to his armor class based on his defensive fighting style. He also gets a second wind, which lets him recover around 9 or 10 hit points on a bonus action. And the kobolds, well, they at least get a hit point upgrade. They now have 5 hit points versus the original edition's 2, but they're still probably unlikely to survive a blow from Sir Roger's magic longsword. And wow, do all of those modern abilities really add up fast. 5th edition Sir Roger only succumbs to Tucker's Kobolds 2% of the time. The kobolds just have way less of a chance of hitting him. They can barely chip away at all those hit points. And with those 2 attacks, he can just like knock them down crazy fast. Tucker's kobolds have like practically no chance against Sir Roger. And honestly, that makes me a little sad. Like really sad. Now, if I'm a 5th edition dungeon master and I want to capture the feel of the original Tucker's Kobolds, I'm going to have to either dramatically increase the number of kobolds in this fight, which I don't love because that'll just slow the game down, or I'm going to have to figure out another way to give those kobolds a fighting chance. For example, if I said that the kobolds were specially trained in these tunnels, like they were on their home ground, and so they got advantage on all their combat rolls, well, this increases the odds of them winning to 5%, so it's still not great. But if I then doubled the number of archers kind of firing from those murder holes like off screen, well, the odds of them winning goes up to 27% chance. But that's still far away from the feel of the original Tucker's Kobolds, and I'm honestly just not sure how to adjust 5th edition here to make it feel like that without swapping out the monsters. But if you have an idea on how to do that, then let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to hear from any dungeon master that successfully captured the feel of these like crappy low-level monsters chipping away at a higher level party. Okay, so let's move on to a completely different system, a non-D20 system, to see how that plays out. I picked Gurps, which is a system intentionally designed to feel and function more like the real world. In Gurps, Sir Roger is a 150-point character, which is comparable to his 5th level status in Dungeons & Dragons. He has Strength 13, Dexterity 13, and Health 12. I gave him some pretty typical warrior-style advantages in Gurps, like combat reflexes, high pain threshold, and fit, which means basically he's really good at taking a beating. He's also armed with a magic broadsword, enchanted with accuracy and puissance, which give him +1 to his attack and damage rolls. The kobolds in Gurps are pretty similar to the kobolds in Dungeons & Dragons. They're weak with their Strength 8, they have 8 hit points, and they have Dexterity of 11. They wear light mail armor, and they're all armed with spears and have a mediocre spear skill of 11, so they'll hit 55% of the time or so. It's worth pointing out that in Gurps, spears are actually pretty good weapons because they're impaling, which means that any damage that can break through Sir Roger's armor is going to get doubled. Now, because of how Tucker's kobolds are described as being relentless, I'm going to say that these kobolds all-out attack. They're forgoing their defenses for +2 bonus damage to penetrate through Sir Roger's armor. However, because these kobolds are also fairly savvy and well organized, I'm also saying that they're not really going to fight to the death, and that if any kobold gets below 0 hit points, he's going to either play dead or run away or disappear through a secret door. They're not going to fight all the way down to instant death because they're smarter than that. The crossbow kobolds in Gurps are also going to play out a little differently. Crossbows, like the spears, do impaling damage, so they're going to be potentially deadly if they can get through Sir Roger's armor. On the other hand, crossbows only fire once every 5 turns in Gurps, because you have to pull out an arrow and then load it in and then crank it and then aim and then fire. It takes 5 seconds, and Gurps is realistic. So what this means is that first volley of crossbow bolts is going to be critically important for our kobolds. Gurps also has some more detailed darkness rules versus Dungeons & Dragons. The kobolds don't care, they have night vision, but Sir Roger is going to suffer a -3 to his attacks because there's dim lantern light in the dungeon. The other thing to point out is that Molotov cocktails are more realistic in Gurps, which means that if it hits you directly and shatters, it can actually explode all over you and incinerate you, and this deals 10 points of damage and ignores armor, and so if that happens to Sir Roger, he's probably in trouble.
Oh look, a kobold with an oil flask. Ooh, I'm so scared.
When I ran my simulation of this battle 100,000 times, Sir Roger was cut down 17% of the time. Now, this is way deadlier than 5th edition, but not nearly as deadly as old school Dungeons & Dragons. But why is that? What's going on here in the system that kind of plants it somewhere in the middle? The main reason here is that Gurps allows heroes to defend themselves against attacks. As the kobolds are shooting and stabbing Sir Roger is parrying and dodging and blocking with his shield with the best of them, deflecting most of the kobold's blows because he's a skilled warrior. And his chain armor is just a huge lifesaver against those low-strength kobold attacks. That mail armor seriously protects him from the arrows, which only killed him 8% of the time he ever went down. To give you an idea of how much of a difference Sir Roger's armor makes, if he was wearing leather armor, not chainmail, then his chances of dying double to 38% of the time. And if he was wearing no armor, like I don't know, maybe goblins stole his arm or he was just going in naked, well, then his odds of survival are 50-50, which is right in line with old school Dungeons & Dragons version of Tucker's Kobolds. As a Gurps game master, if you wanted this encounter to play out a little deadlier, closer to the original, you've got lots of options. For example, if you gave those kobolds fine spears, they're going to do an extra point of damage, which is going to help get through that armor a little bit more. And if you up their skill just a little bit by like a point or two, they're going to hit a little bit more often, and you're going to be right around the deadliness of the original Tucker's Kobolds. You got a lot of options there to kind of hit the level of deadliness that you want. Okay, so the final results are in. In this encounter of Sir Roger versus Tucker's Kobolds, the deadliest game system goes to old school Dungeons & Dragons with a 54% chance of total kobold victory. Then Gurps with a 17% chance, and finally 5th edition with a measly 2% chance for poor Tucker's Kobolds. Okay, so what's the game design lesson in all of this? I think it all comes down to player expectations. There's really no right way that this encounter should play out. I bet if you asked 100 fantasy RPG fans what should happen in this scenario, you'd get very different answers. Some players will think that Sir Roger deserves to survive this encounter, chopping down kobolds left and right into a bloody pile until he emerges with barely a scratch. I mean, that's kind of exactly what happened when Aragorn fought dozens of Uruk-hai on Amon Hen in Lord of the Rings, right? Other players are going to crave the desperation of a tough fight. They're going to want this to play out like Battle of the Bastards on Game of Thrones. They want the odds stacked against them because they want that rush that of their hero, like surviving the kobolds and living to fight another day. And honestly, either scenario is fine. They both exist in fantasy games and fantasy literature. But what matters is that the system that you're picking matches what your players expect, because ultimately your job as a game master is to make the game fun for the players that you have. For the record, by the way, I kind of like that middle ground of like somewhere between 2% and 50%, but everyone's going to have a different opinion on this. I also think that this scenario just does such a wonderful job of highlighting the differences between old school Dungeons & Dragons and the newer editions. 5th edition is obviously designed to feel more heroic. This is why heroes on the covers of old editions look terrified all the time, while heroes on the cover of newer D&D look like superheroes. It's intentionally designed to feel that way. And while I'll never say that it's impossible to convey the feel of the original Tucker's Kobolds in 5th edition, it is way harder. Focus your players and their creativity and their playtime on something else. Like maybe Tucker's Kobolds are deadly because their archers use a special rare poison that makes the PCs hallucinate and think that their donkeys have turned into fire demons. And then while the PCs are all distracted, a core group of kobolds are actually working to like bring the tunnel ceiling down on everybody. That's a great way of making Tucker's Kobolds feel deadly and memorable without having to worry about like chipping away at hit points, which just doesn't work as well in 5th edition. And for you Gurps players, I think the lesson is actually the same as my last few videos. Equipment in Gurps just matters a lot, just like it does in real life. One suit of good armor can make the difference between life and death. And you just have to make sure that your players know that going in, so they don't make a mistake and get killed just because they didn't pony up some gold for a good set of chainmail. So what did I miss? Let me know in the comments below. Especially if you've been a game master or player in a scenario like Tucker's Kobolds, I'd love to know how it played out, even if it's using a game system that I'm not familiar with or I didn't mention here. And if you like this video and want more videos like it, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Or else I'm going to call Tucker and he'll unleash kobolds on your tabletop RPG group. Until next time, I'm JC. And just remember, take care of your dungeon donkey. You just never know when it's going to transform into an evil fire demon. It happens to the best of them.